recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, there was a tweet shared from a account called Pink News Whistleblowers, um, including a voice recording of the CEO of the media site claiming that he doesn't want Pink News to be seen as some such kind of charity for the trans community. The recording was released last week. If we could bring it up now, we'll just listen through and then we can discuss.
Things that relate to trans and non-binary remain incredibly contentious. I think that the marriage, the idea, and we're celebrating 10 years of same-sex marriage this year, I think that the society has moved on and it has been generally accepted. And while, yes, when we were doing it, it was contentious, I think that the other things are even more contentious than that was then, and are significantly contentious now, and there is significant brand and partner nervousness around that topic. And so, in my view, they are different things. I think that we just have to be careful, and it's like, that's for others to do. And also the business can't afford to do that. It's the role of others to seek to change narratives. If we start doing too many things, I think it will harm the conversations with advertisers for other things, because it gives the perception that Pink News is something different to it is. What we are is an entertainment content powerhouse. We don't want to be positioning ourselves as some sort of like charity.
One of the most substantially awful things that he did was receive a £280,000 grant from Google to launch an advocacy platform specifically for trans people, and a very cheaply made platform was never launched. That's something the trans community could have really benefited from, because Pink News is a well-known, respected name, respected enough to get such a substantial amount of money from Google, but trust was placed in the wrong hands. Him and his husband, the COO, Anthony James, just have a history of misogyny, racism, ableism within the company. A lot of people have left because of it. It's just standard felonious CEO behavior, but at the detriment of a minority that's being seen as someone who they're supporting. And it's just really disappointing for a lot of people. The way I see it, the majority of people have the ability to make a conscious choice about whether or not they'll be actively involved in the news. The mainstream press is so actively against us. So we turn to Pink News because it's this respected name that seems to be knowledgeable. Like, they have a very clear demographic bias of the LGBTQIA plus community. So when I was thinking about Benjamin Cohen pandering to transphobic advertisers, that doesn't really seem like the case, because advertisers would want to work with Pink News to be seen as progressive. So him saying that that would harm his relationship with advertisers, they're making a conscious choice to work with Pink News for a very specific reason.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that was part of this is one of the stories that I think has been completely overlooked in the mainstream media side of things. And it's strange because typically when it comes to the mainstream media, they're normally quite happy to jump on controversies with smaller outlets.
Absolutely, yeah.
The non-legacy media in that sense. But we haven't seen very much. And when you search, obviously, Pink News transphobia, you get news articles from Pink News about transphobia.
That's all you see, yeah. I want to touch on him saying trans issues are contentious. What I've been saying quite a lot is trans issues are only contentious to those who are transphobic. Their mission statement literally says that they are advocating for the equality of all of the members of the LGBTQIA plus community, but is then worried that trans issues are controversial, but they're only controversial to those who think our lives are controversial, which aren't people he should be engaging with.
I was literally about to say that exact thing. As soon as I heard that again, our mission is we're not here to make changes. Their mission statement says we're here to empower change.
Yeah. And it says it's the role of others to change narratives. You are the press, you are the media. It is quite literally the media, if not intentionally, subsequential role of the press is changing narratives within societies. And he had the opportunity for this company to be remembered as one of the primary helpful organizations that helped move the trans identity into one that's accepted more. But now he's just going to be remembered with the other organizations that sold us out.
It's infuriating. I'm just looking at it as we speak. Pink News exists to inform, inspire change, and empower people to be themselves. Why do people keep saying that they're here to do the change and do it? We've come full circle. We've come all the way back around to the start with the change.
Had a lot of it.
There's a lot of lies about change happening at the moment. It's
really disappointing, because I feel like with Pink News, for a lot of us who were very involved in what's been said about us, we were aware of Pink News' shortcomings. On TikTok specifically, they have just such a complete lack of moderation for their comments. They let the most vile transphobia just brew in there, targeted towards all of their viewers. But it's fine, it gets engagement, you know, we get the comments up, it gets the videos seen more. So we're going to allow people to be violently, verbally assaulted in our comment section.
I think, yeah, I mean, this is the part of the thing that is so frustrating with this as well. I feel like over the last few months, especially seeing what's been happening in Gaza and seeing the amount of, I think there's been a broad awakening from people of like, nobody's safe. Like there's not a safe space for people. Whether it's celebrities that you thought were going to do the right thing and care about the right thing, or whether you're talking about publications that you trust. Me personally, a lot of Neil Gaiman was a real blow for me in terms of finding out about what was another problematic celebrity. Turns out to be anyone who you admire, anyone you look up to. I think we are really starting to feel that between the elite and normal people. What is distressing with this one is like, this was supposed to be some sort of safe space, but also at the same time we're seeing a lot more insidious kind of anti-trans propaganda spreading across these mainstream outlets as well. Something that we were talking about before the stream was around the BBC's hiring of Sophia Batiza as their new gender and identity reporter. As an example, the BBC is supposed to be neutral, it's supposed to be balanced, it's not supposed to be incentivized by fear-mongering or anything like that. You won't see the same sort of headlines as you see in things like The Telegraph. And yet, when you do put a critical eye to a lot of the content around the trans community, you realize that there's a lot of insidious, subtly transphobic content. I'm calling it subtle from the perspective of, I imagine it stands out pretty clearly when you're aware of it.
It is very subtle, yeah, painfully subtle. And I think it is a reflection of who Sophia Batiza is following and who she's engaging in her feed. I wrote down just a few. She follows Helen Joyce of Sex Matters. She follows Sex Matters and LGB Alliance, Trans Widows Voices, and Transgender Trend. Just all of these overtly anti-trans pages, and the kind of gender critical language pops up every now and then in the articles, specifically in the Roxanne Tickle versus the Giggle for Girls app case. Almost immediately, she said that Roxanne Tickle was removed on the basis of being male. No self-respecting or like actually progressive gender and identity reporter would ever frame that question that way, or statement that way even. They would at least put it in quotation marks, but it wasn't. And she later says, identifies as a woman, but the Australian Federal Court ruling literally stated that referring to Roxanne Tickle as a woman was legally unimpeachable. And yet here we have the BBC's gender and identity reporter saying she was removed for being male, which just wasn't the case.
It's so like, it's funny because I know like we have some people, like I was reading about it the other day, it's something like 4 in 10 people won't read past the headline when they're looking at the news. I consider myself to be someone who's pretty intense about looking at bias when I'm looking through reporting, but going through some of the coverage that we see around the trans community and trans issues, it is difficult to detect. Like it's trying to spot like a black hole. It's trying to spot something that's not there.
Definitely, yeah.
I think the example that I was looking at from Sophia was there was another article written about Iman Khalif and another boxer that was embroiled in this whole insane folk devil row that happened in the last couple of weeks, and not once throughout that article did
this witch hunt towards them.
yeah, and not once in that article did she refer to either of the boxers as she or women.
No, they were fighters.
Fighters.
We can only talk about them as fighters because we can't corroborate this information from the International Boxing Committee, so we just can't possibly know.
It's infuriating.
It's just awful. And then that in the archive article that she wrote, she said that they both had XY chromosomes, but then corrected it in an updated version of the article to say that we don't know if this information is true. But then I wrote down what else she said. Critics have speculated that perhaps the fighters have DSD, but within that paragraph, she's almost implying that if they do have DSD, she can't possibly call them women within the broader context of that paragraph. And it's just, she is the gender and identity reporter. We need the creative wording, the very small fine print to be completely on our side. Otherwise, people are going to read that article and they're going to go, this is a great big piece on some information that's been weaponized by Oliver Brown in the Telegraph. Just about every single article he wrote for weeks was on the boxers. And now we're seeing positive articles very creatively saying, we kind of share the gender critical mindset, but we're not going to overtly say that to people in our articles because we want to be perceived as neutral.
Yeah, I think this is something that, to be honest, I'm tying it back into the wider issue that we are seeing with mainstream media weaponizing a lot of these supposedly neutral faces. It comes back as well, I'm going to bring it all around, to Keir Starmer's respectability politics. The idea that we're going to be polite about the ways that we put this bigotry in. And I think what scares me at the moment is, in the same way we have writers like Sophia saying, well, we don't know, there's no way to confirm whether or not they're women, when we know that they are. We also have BBC coverage saying someone like a woman in Palestine has claimed that her entire family have been killed in a strike. She's claimed it, but we can't possibly
know if that's Israel. So we're going to leave the headline as it is. Yeah, it's just a claim. We've got no way of verifying this information. And it was like with their reporting on the UN aid operation that had to be paused. When I first saw that article, it was at the same time that Reuters and Al Jazeera have posted about almost exclusively the polio vaccination campaign within their articles. And then the BBC wrote 190 words, not mentioning the vaccine once, but they can't even get away with saying we needed to verify that information because the IDF allowed the vaccines to come through on Sunday, and the UN were vocal about needing to vaccinate an unsubstantiated amount of children before the vaccines were put in place. So the BBC deliberately choosing not to report on this information just because we can't verify if they have to stop the campaign or not, and then missing out all of the context for no apparent reason other than they just don't feel like talking about it.
It's really scary. And I think when you've then got like Sophia's happy to go straight in on the XY chromosomes, we can go all in on that, throw that accusation straight out. But then when it comes to the other side, we need to verify.
On the first day that story came out, it took me half an hour to figure out that this information wasn't trusted, that it was posted by a corrupt Russian source on a Telegram channel that just got blown out of proportion. And yet here we are, her days after it's gone out, her posting this big think piece on information, still not sure if we can't fully verify this information. So I'm just going to say it as if it's true almost.
That's also a point in the way that that piece was shared. It was very similar to, it was like an explainer. It was like, what's going on? Here's the facts. It wasn't an opinion piece.
The entire gender critical movement just boils down to Eurocentric beauty standards and enforcing this antiquated version of feminism. They think that we're violating feminism by enforcing binaries, but we're showing the opposite. And they're being very subtle in the papers, talking about almost any time trans people are referred to, it's always trans-identified male or identifies as a woman, in the same subtext where they're painting us out to be predators and printing quotes from Kate Barker, the chief executive of the LGB Alliance, in Guardian articles, one that's perceived to be a bit more left-leaning. So even for the mainstream who think they're progressive, they know a lot about these things, and they're not going to be easily influenced when every single piece of information that's being told to them about a specific minority that chances are they don't interact with much in their life, they're not going to have many places to counteract that understanding. I mean, even my dad, when I mentioned the boxing situation to him immediately, oh, the trans boxers.
Oh.
Just because that's how it was talked about. And it's just a reflection of how it is for a lot of people. A few words come up and then that's the understanding, because we are small in number and people don't need to put this huge amount of thought into us. That's not what we want at all. We want to be left alone to live, but we are talked about a lot.
Things that are being positioned as a protection for women, it's the exact same group that's going to turn around and remove. I think there was one in Nevada where they managed to have two laws in the same day repealed. One was specifically around women's abortion rights, and the other was around healthcare for trans teens.
And they can do it almost instantaneously. We saw with Victoria Atkins on the last day, hours before our ex-government dismantled, just thought, no, I'm going to abuse this review that didn't even call for an emergency ban on a medication. It is a reflection of the government being able to manufacture every single step of a process to restrict bodily autonomy or ban a medication for a group they don't agree with or for something they don't understand. And I think it's very naive, but I can almost understand why people don't think about it broader than the trans community, because we've been painted as the big issue that is in healthcare and societies at the moment. So people, but they do need to think about the broader implications of this, because we are seeing medication being banned because they wanted it to be banned. And tying on with the TERF argument, I feel like the trans community at this stage doesn't even need to do too much to combat the gender criticals other than amplify their voices, because they are showing they don't know what they're talking about. They're consistently messing up. J.K. Rowling's been told that she's in a bit of legal trouble and finally was silenced for at least a bit. All we need to do is let them slip up and then amplify their voices. Like with the Roxanne and Tickle case, Tickle v. Giggle case even, they had gender critical self-proclaimed experts. The likes of Helen Joyce, who these gender criticals rely on, they almost idolize her as this messiah, this all-knowing person who can dispel the trans ideology with her knowledge about what gender actually is. She was found to be no expert at all in the matter, and none of her evidence was used. These people will trip over themselves with time.
I think that's why it's so frustrating to see these middling, these centrists not taking sides, not sticking up, because it is such an easy thing to disprove. I think I was talking to someone the other day who said, like, it feels like every time people talk about wanting to protect women, it only happens when there's a chance to be bigoted in some other way. We want to talk about protecting women in bathrooms, even though practically it doesn't. None of the options that people try and present for that make any sense in any way. The centrist specialty, that is true. But if we're talking about violence against women and girls, it's because of immigration. It's because of the immigrants, maybe. Maybe they're the ones doing it. It's anything but looking at the actual problem that we're facing.
Which was declared, what was it, like a national emergency in this country.
National emergency.
We're seeing all of this rhetoric that there's too many immigrants coming in and the trans people are bad. It all ties in. When we say there's no equality until everyone is equal, it's because these things seep into other groups of people and it affects their lives. It's this fear of something they don't understand, but that misunderstood confusion comes back and harms them almost every time.
I mean, it's Keir Starmer's standing army of police. Maybe I don't like seeing racists have a good day. I'm glad they've had a bad day. I'm not super keen on a massive increase in police presences. Don't feel like that's going to work out well for us. I'm not super keen on invasive procedures to check if female athletes should be allowed to compete, because I feel like that's not going to play out well for us in the end. I'm not very keen on really anything that's going to fully deplete our rights, because it's very rare that when that happens and when that kind of treatment comes into place, it doesn't normally work out well for anyone in any minority group.
Patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.